then we're going to start right now.
Thank you.
Back for a return engagement with more fascinating things about the human body in a fun kind of way is Jennie Morton. Go on. Take it away, Jennie.
Thank you. Yes, sorry if I'm freaking anyone out with all the weird anatomy stuff, but it's kind of fun to see what's underneath, right? And you don't have to remember all this stuff in a very kind of technical way. It's like, just get the concepts, just get the shape of it, and it's and then the body knows it. It's the weird thing. It's like, you might not be able to hold all the information in your head, but remember that doesn't really count. It's whether the body understands. It's like, oh, I get it. I just get it in my body. So now we're going to be talking about anxiety, and obviously performance anxiety can be an issue for some people, but we're also just going to be looking at anxiety in a broader sense, but also how obviously we know that anxiety affects the voice, and that's a little bit tricky for us when we're singers and we're nervous, but also how the voice and singing can help with anxiety, right? We're going to look at what's underneath that, because a lot of people will sing right when they're anxious, just it helps them, and we'll look at why that is, and then hopefully we can harness that as a performer so that we can use the very thing that's making us anxious to get us out of dodge. So I'm going to bring up some slides again with more body parts, and we're really when we're talking about anxiety, again, it tends to be mediated by that nervous system, which we've already visited already. But when we look at the voice in particular, it's really an expression of our inner identity. People always say the eyes are the window to the soul, but I always say it's the voice. When I'm in a clinical session with someone and I take the medical history, I do all of that stuff, I'm listening to all the little timbres of the voice and the little nuances in the voice to tell me how they feel about different things. If I hear a bit of constriction coming in when they're talking about one topic, but then they're really open when they're talking about something else, it tells me a lot about their relationship, what things are troubling them, and again, what the words might belie, because words can lie, but the timbre of the voice doesn't. So it's really an expression of our inner identity. And not all anxiety is performance related. In fact, for a lot of performers, a lot of the professional performers I work with, being on stage is the happy place, right? They're fine when they're there. It's being in the real world that freaks them out. So they go on stage to get away from their anxiety. So we're going to look at, anxiety from a more global perspective, as well as how it relates to us as vocalists. So what is anxiety? A lot of people sort of put it in this bucket of it's a bad thing, right? And I do a lot of, I'm a psychologist as well, so I do a lot of anxiety management work with people. And often one of the things they'll say is, I want you to get rid of my anxiety. I'm like, no, you don't. Number one, it keeps you safe, right? It's the fight or flight response. And if you, I don't know, step out into traffic and a car suddenly comes out of nowhere, you need that system to get online to help you react to that. So it's a safety mechanism. But also, we're going to dive into what are the symptoms of anxiety. But if you think of the sort of the obvious things like shortness of breath, tight shoulders, a little fluttery in the stomach, dry mouth. Well, what happens when you're, about to see someone that you absolutely adore and you haven't seen them for weeks, months, and you're going to see them tomorrow, or you're about to see them in 5 minutes' time? You get the same thing, little butterflies in the stomach, little tight in the chest, mouth gets a bit dry. The symptoms of joy and excitement, sort of happy excitement, are the same as anxiety. In the body, there is no discrimination, right? It's just the emotional context in which they're happening that's different. So if you take away anxiety, you take away your capacity to experience joy. So when we start to look at this system through that lens, what we're really looking at is, are we having an appropriate and proportionate experience of anxiety? Is it appropriate in the given situation, i.e. you've got a performance tomorrow and you're sitting in your bedroom the night before stressing about it? Well, there's nothing actually threatening you in your environment right now. You're worrying about something that's happening in the future, not really appropriate to be in a state of anxiety at that point. And is it proportionate, i.e. you're about to step on stage? It's actually good to have a little bit of that sort of fight or flight system online to get you on your game. It's just a system of arousal, but it's disproportionate if you're like completely freaked out so that you can't put a foot on the stage, right? So is it appropriate? Is it proportionate? But we need it, right? And anxiety, we have to remember, is a primitive system. It goes back to what we were talking about in the last session, that sort of limbic system activated situation that is designed to keep us safe. It's wonderful, right? So if what the body is anticipating is some sort of mortal threat, and it's trying to get you into a state that you can react or respond to that threat. And it's not on or off, it's like a spectrum. So we can be our sympathetic nervous system, which we're going to see is what drives this, is just what gets us out of bed in the morning, right? It's something that picks our heart rate up and makes us get on our game. So it's not something that we should label as a bad thing. Okay, so my thing stopped working, there we go. So a little reminder of our nervous system anatomy. The brain and spinal cord is the central nervous system. Then we have all those branches going out to the periphery. And here's a little diagram. We covered that blue section in the last session, our sensory system and our movement motor system. What we're going to focus on today is that green system. So we have another branch of our nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, which is basically the body's autopilot. So there's a whole bunch of things we don't have to tell our body to do, right? Breathing, heartbeat, digestive system, they all work without us going and beat the heart and beat the heart and breathe in and breathe out. You know, if we had to tell ourselves to do those things, we never get anything done. So those are all in this involuntary automatic system, whereas that motor system we were talking about earlier is the one that we choose to control. So let's look at that autonomic nervous system in more detail. It has two branches, don't worry, no quiz at the end. But just to give us the architecture of what's happening, we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight system where the anxiety response lives, but also where joy lives too. Then we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest system. So it's the chill out, part, the bit where you're just relaxing at home, or you're lying on a beach, or you're sleeping, right? And it's also where growth and repair take place. And so we're going to look at these two systems separately so that we can see all the things that go with them. And so we can start to recognize when we're in one or the other, but we're never entirely in one or the other. Every breath you take, your in-breath gives you a little bit more sympathetic dominance. It charges the system a little bit. The out-breath takes you into a little more parasympathetic dominance, which is why a sigh feels good, right? People just say, breathe out, let it go. That's getting you into a more parasympathetic dominant state. So we're always in a dance between the two. But if you think of it as like a spectrum, are we kind of living up one end of this kind of fight or flight state? Or are we ever visiting that sort of more chill out rest state? So let's have a look at the sympathetic nervous system first, the fight or flight system. So again, primitive system, sort of designed to help you deal with or avoid predators. So if there's some hairy creature approaching in your environment, then you need to mount a response. Is it close enough that you can that you're going to have to fight it, or are you going to have to Have you got enough time to get up and run away very quickly? Either way, you need to mount a response. So a bunch of things have to happen in the body. So remember that sensory system, we have all our senses, which are like our little kind of warning system, early warning system. What can I see? What can I hear? What can I smell on the air? What can I taste? That are telling you something's coming. So you might hear, you know, hoofs coming, stampeding towards you, and you can smell the smell of a particular beast. So your senses are detecting that. And we have an area in our brain called the amygdala, and that's a bit like the brain smoke detector that's kind of looking for trouble all the time. And as soon as a sensory signal has come in that registers trouble in there, we're going to initiate a stress response. Now, I'm talking here about physical threat. This is designed as a system to keep us away from mortal threat, right? Being killed by a predator. But today we don't get into that situation very often. Today it's more psychological. So it can be psychological stress, a psychological predator, if you like, that's attacking you. And more often than not, it's our own, what I call the mind monkeys, right? We don't even need something outside ourselves to stress us. We're doing that job for ourselves, in which case we're becoming our own predator and prey, which is not very sensible thing to do when we look at the biological cost of running this system. So one of the systems that the brain is going to use is this sympathetic nervous system to mount a response that either allows us to get out of dodge really quick or prepare us to fight the predator. So some of the things that happen when we're in this state. So if you've detected the threat, the amygdala's gone into red alert mode, it's lit up the body. These are the things that are going to happen. Your heart rate's going to go up because suddenly we need to start pumping blood around to our muscles pretty quick, which means your blood pressure increases. So we're also looking at this through the lens of our health, right? What is this doing to our health? So heart rate's gone up, blood pressure's increased. Muscles are going to tense so that we're ready to fight this predator or run away very quickly. Now, this system is very biologically expensive. If you think of your body as having a battery, a bit like your phone or your laptop or whatever, if you've got a lot of apps running, then there's less, it's going to drain your battery more quickly, right? So there are certain things in the body that drain a lot of battery life. And so when we're in this situation of mortal threat, the body has to prioritize. It needs to divert all energy to keeping us safe. So it's going to switch off a bunch of things that it considers to be non-essential. So the immune system takes a lot of our battery life. So that's going to get suppressed when we're in fight or flight mode, which is why people tend to get coughs, colds, flus, whatever, when they are in a perpetual state of stress. This system is designed for short-term use only, and there should be a fine for misuse, and there is a fine for misuse, and it's ill health, right? Sweating increases. So a lot of people get sweaty palms, right? I work with a lot of instrumental musicians, and when they have performance anxiety, they're like, I get sweaty palms and I can't feel the strings and my hands slip on the instrument. So we start to sweat a bit more. Another system that takes a lot of our battery life in the body is the digestive system. That gets switched off when we go into fight or flight mode. So that includes things like all the gastric secretions, and our digestion begins in our mouth, right? We have saliva is part of the digestive enzyme producing material that breaks down food. So when we go into stress mode and we switch off the digestive system, that gets switched off, which for us as singers can be a problem because we end up with dry mouth, right? So you end up with that, I'm really dry, and then you're blooding loads of water. So also that means that the digestive system, when it shuts down, how many people get, queasy stomachs when they're nervous, right? This is the connection here. It gets shut off. So anything you have eaten that's still in the system, and bear in mind, it takes many hours for things to travel through the whole system. If there's food in the system, the body and the digestive system gets shut down, what the body will do is it will try and eject the contents, right? It's trying to make you feel light and ready to respond to the threat. Essentially, the body doesn't care whether you've digested your lunch if you're about to become lunch for a predator. So that's why some people might feel like they want to actually throw up, and some people do throw up when they're nervous, because the body's just going, right, get rid of that because it's unnecessary right now. Or if it's further down, so that's if you've recently eaten. If it's further lower down in the system, people often have to run to the bathroom, right? So digestive issues are a problem when you are living in stress mode, and just that general kind of discomfort in the abdominal area. If you have food in the system and then the system shuts down, you're not absorbing anything. And if you think of any organic material that's left in a container and it's not being processed, it's going to start to break down. It's going to sort of ferment and rot, and it produces gases, which can lead to bloating, swelling, discomfort. So all those things that people associate with anxiety, this abdominal discomfort, is basically because your digestive system's offline and everything's just, I just say, you're just getting, I get people who say, I have the best diet, I eat purely organic, and I don't eat sugars, and it's just the best diet on earth, but I still have digestive problems. It's not what you eat so much as the emotional environment in which you are eating, because if you are stressed and eating the most beautiful food on God's earth, it doesn't matter. It's going to become very expensive gut compost if you're in stress mode. So it's a silly idea. We get high, rapid breathing, right? Again, not useful for us as singers when the breath is suddenly getting very short and you find that you're having to breathe in the middle of breath phrases and your musical director gets annoyed with you. We also get sugar released into the bloodstream. So we need instant energy to mount this response. And so we have sugar stores in the liver that get dumped into the bloodstream. But typically when we're a victim of our own mind monkeys, we're not responding to this threat. We're just sitting in our living room stressing about tomorrow's performance and getting all anxious. You've got all the sugar being dumped into your system, but you're not using it because you're not burning it off. Sugar is highly corrosive and it causes inflammation, which there's another of these things that happens when we're in stress mode. It produces inflammation of your blood vessels, all your organs, and it's actually corrosive as well. And that means your poor old pancreas has to be pumping out insulin to try and bring your blood sugar levels down because it's dangerous. This is why issues like diabetes and poor glucose control are a disease of stress, as they're called, because of this. You're producing a lot of sugar, but then your pancreas can get overwhelmed and it can end up flaking out. And then you've got diabetes, right? So this is affecting whole body health. And that inflammation, we also produce inflammatory chemicals when we're in stress mode. You might think, why on earth would we do that? And it's actually a part of the immune system. So when I said the immune system is suppressed, nothing in the body is that simple. A lot of branches of the immune system are suppressed, but inflammation is actually produced. If you're about to get attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, one of the outcomes of that could be an open wound, right? So your body is preparing for all eventualities. When you get an open wound, if you get a cut, what happens? You get an inflammatory response. It gets red, it gets hot and swollen, because inflammatory chemicals, we give them a bad name, but they're actually part of the healing process, right? They're coming in to bind up the wound and protect us from bacterial invasion of that wound. So inflammation is being produced as a sort of preemptive strike against an open wound. But again, that's not really what's happening to us. So where's that inflammation going? It's running unchecked in our system, causing gut inflammation, causing soreness in our joints. Why is it you always get that old backache or that old elbow pain from an injury years ago comes back when you're stressed? Because your inflammation's up in the body. So it lights everything up. So not a place we want to be hanging out when it's not appropriate or proportionate to do so. Okay, so let's chill out and go and look at the rest and digest, the parasympathetic system. So this is basically when we're in this state, you kind of got the reverse of everything that we were just looking at going on. Your heart rate can come down, your blood pressure can come down, your muscles can relax, breathing gets back into a regular pattern. Your digestive system comes back online, hence why it's called rest and digest, right? So your saliva's back online, all the mucus secretions that help break down your food, the movement of the gut's back online, you're absorbing your food again. So this is really where we get all our growth and repair. All the body's maintenance work can only be done when we're in this mode. So we're only in growth and repair mode when there's no threat, right? So if you are in a constant state of stress, and I don't mean that you're in like a panic attack, but you're just kind of in that edgy, can't quite sit still, just feeling a bit angsty, none of your repair work's getting done. So we all know what happens when you just patch things. Eventually, they're going to stop functioning so well. You need time when the body does its, when you get the whole maintenance crew that comes out and does the deep clean, right? It has to be done in this parasympathetic mode, which is sleep mode as well. And of course, we all know anxiety affects sleep. And if people have questions around that, we can talk about that in the question session later on. It's about, you know, when we go on stage and perform and we really are physical, we can cause little bits of micro damage in our muscles and things. That's perfectly normal with exercise. But if we're not getting then into a parasympathetic state to rest and recover, we're not getting the repair work done. So we can see how stress can also increase our injury risk as well. So when I'm assessing somebody who's coming to me with an injury, I'm also assessing their emotional state to see what role that's playing in the production and the healing from this injury. Because if someone's in a stress state, they're not going to heal from the injury as well as someone who is not. Okay, so getting a little more technical here, we're going to look at the vagus nerve. Now, this is kind of come into pop culture. It's got a bit of a pop following these days, the vagus nerve. Most people have heard of it now, whereas probably about 5-10 years ago, nobody had heard of the vagus nerve. But it's vagus, the word or the kind of prefix VAG comes from the Latin for wandering, like vagabond, right? And it's known as the wandering nerve because it literally wanders all the way through the body and serves multiple of our organs. So we actually have a right one and a left one. And they come out of our brain stem at the back here and down into the neck. Now, these are nerves that don't actually come via that spinal cord, like we talked about before. These are this is one of what's known as the cranial nerves. So it comes straight out of the brain down into the sort of back of our neck area, and it serves all our organs, the heart, the lungs, all the digestive system we've just talked about. And it basically is the parasympathetic supply to all those organs. It gives the body the all clear signal. So if you've been in stress mode, you've been fighting your predator and you've run to safety, if you think of animals, right? If a predator comes up, there's all this growling and blood and fluff and fur flying everywhere, and then they retreat to their various corners, and then they immediately reset into parasympathetic mode. The vagus nerve kicks in and goes, we're all clear, no threat now, you can go back into your repair mode. Animals don't fester, right? After they've had a spat with another creature, you don't then see them, you know, in the field going, oh my God, did you just see what happened? And stressing about it, right? They're grazing, they're cleaning themselves, they're just resetting their system. We, in our such superior intelligence, just replay everything. We're always festering about something that happened or worrying about something that might happen. We're not in the moment, right? We're not giving our body the all clear signal so that this parasympathetic, the vagus nerve, can kick us into parasympathetic mode. Now, when we're looking at this in the terms of voice, what's really important to know is the vagus nerve, as well as doing the parasympathetic supply to all those organs, it also serves a lot of muscles in the body. It serves some of the muscles of our palate, which is the roof of our mouth, and the pharynx, which is the back of our throat. And I'm sure you've all been in your voice training, being taught things like, you know, finding that width in your vocal tract and widening like you're in a yawn place. All those muscles and your swallowing reflex and finding that all the shapes we make to create sound are all mediated by the vagus nerve. There's also a branch of that nerve called the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Again, no need to remember it, but the larynx, laryngeal refers to the larynx, which is our voice box, and it branches to the small muscles that operate our voice as well. So all those pitch changes you make are done by changes in the small muscles around our voice box. Those are all mediated via the vagus nerve. It's involved in swallowing. It's also involved in the gag reflex. So if I'm testing to see the tone of someone's vagus nerve, I'll actually use a sort of tongue depressor thing to induce a gag reflex to see if their vagus nerve is online. Not very pleasant, but it does give us the information we need. It also gives us, if that vagus nerve, so if we're in a stress state, the vagus nerve is not really coming on strongly because it's part of this parasympathetic system. It can leave it in a state of what I call fritzing, technical term, kind of fritzing in and out. And what it can do is it can induce sort of a nervous cough or a tickly throat. Again, something not useful when you're about to go on stage and sing. But if you've ever, there are sometimes those people, I sometimes see it with patients that I'm working with when we're just chatting at the beginning of the session, and they're always kind of clearing their throat. There's this sort of nervous cough. I'll always think, what's going on with your vagus nerve? Because it's that sign of anxiety kicking in and out that's fritzing the vagus nerve. So you can see this is a pretty important nerve to be considering when we're looking at the voice in particular. Now, to bring it into the context of a little of what we were talking about before in terms of communication, there's something called polyvagal theory, and it's basically a theory that was discovered a few years ago that found that we actually have two distinct branches of our vagus nerve, and they do different things. So we've been talking here about anxiety, right? The fight or flight response, and seeing all the biology that goes underneath that. So a few years ago, before this was discovered, we used to just see anxiety and emotional states through the lens of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. But neither of those systems described or gave a reason for the freeze response. So some people, when they get freaked out, they actually go, oh, and they freeze, right? They don't get like super edgy and anxious. They just go, oh, and they freeze. So this polyvagal theory actually described the biology for the freeze response. And this is important to know because everybody's anxiety manifests differently. And we have different systems that operate these different responses. And the way we address them requires different interventions as well. So there are three kind of layers to this system. And when we are in our kind of normal, relaxed, no threat in our environment, we call that socially engaged. So when you're not stressed out, you can hang with people, you can chat, you can interact, and you're fine. And that's using what's called the ventral branch of our vagus nerve. Again, you don't have to remember these terms. Ventral means chest. It's anything towards the front of the body. This is a branch of the vagus nerve that's more towards the front of the body. And when that's online, because we're not under threat, we can chill out, we can interact with people. Then when you get a threat in your environment, something's going on, you're going to mount yourself into that sympathetic nervous system, right? So all the things we looked at before are all going to kick in. Heart rate's going to go up, we're ready, ooh, something's going on. If you hang out in that state too long, remember how biologically expensive it is. Basically, it's not working for you. It's not removing you from the threat. It's not working. We have this other system which switches on what's called the dorsal vagus branch. Dorsal just means towards the back of your body. Think of the dorsal fin of a shark, it's on its back. That takes us into the freeze response. So this is also a safety mechanism, and it actually harkens back to sort of our reptilian associations in the body. So reptiles, so if you think of fish in the sea, they don't have a sympathetic nervous system. When they're under predatory attack, they play dead, they freeze, they stop and they don't move, because aquatic predators catch their prey by movement. They see a flick of movement and they go, there's a thing, I'll get it. So if they play dead, they hope that that predator will just cruise on by and they'll get away with it. And there's actually a little vole that's a mammal that has this same mechanism, that it plays dead when it's under threat, and it literally drops its heart rate so low that it appears that it's dead. And it has glands that emit the smell of rotting flesh. So ingenious. So that a predator will come along and go, ooh, that's stinky and that's dead. I'm not touching that, and it'll move on. So it can stay in that state up to 4 hours. So we also have that ability to drop into this freeze state. And this is kind of the hierarchy of how those systems work, but because it is a hierarchical system, and then we need to understand this in order to know how to get us out of those states and back to the social engagement system. Because if you try and skip some of these steps, then you won't resolve what you're trying to resolve. So if we look at that bottom green band, the social engagement, so no threat in the environment, I'm free to chat with people, be open, I can feel joy, I can be in the present moment, I'm grounded, I'm connected, I can be curious, right, and go and investigate things. I can be compassionate and mindful. So this is the state we really want to have as our default. Then say, I can hear something coming, or there's somebody who's, I can hear them coming up the stairs and there's someone that freaks me out, right? We're getting into non-safe mode. So we're heading into that red band in the middle. So this is that sympathetic fight flight state. So this is where we can get into worry, anxiety, full on panic if you're up the full end of it. It's also anger, frustration, rage. So anger is a defense response, right? So when someone's angry at you, they're actually terrified. And it's useful to know that when you're in, if you find yourself in a state of conflict. This is, a form of get out. You're trying to create boundaries. Don't tell me what to do, right? You're drawing boundaries, but it's a sympathetic response. So if you're hanging out in that, but then it's really not working for you and you're not getting anywhere, you might drop into that freeze state. And this is the overwhelmed state, the state of helplessness. You're just numb, you're dissociated. This is, I don't want to get out from under my duvet kind of day, right? It's also where depression lives. So people talk a lot about anxiety. Where does depression come into all of this? Well, this is where depression lives. You're shut down, you're just, trapped, and you just don't want to interact with anyone, right? So what's key to know about this is when you're in that kind of checked out state, you're really sort of you don't want to do anything, you have no motivation, but you can't get back from that freeze state back to the social engagement state without coming back through the red zone, through the sympathetic state. So you actually have to be able to induce a little bit of sympathetic drive to just pull you out of the freeze state so that you can get back to safety, get back to the high ground in the green zone. So it always works like this. So remember I said in the last session, we have to work with our biology. So when we're trying to address these, we've got to recognize which of these states we're in. And then we're going to use certain different tools to be able to auto-correct our way out of those systems back to the green zone at the top. So if you're in that sympathetic response, so you're stressed, you're anxious, you're kind of freaked out, you're angsty, and you're jumpy, then you're a bit like that little puppy in the top corner, right? Remember, all your senses get dialed up when you're in this state. Everything's like red zone. So your everything's increased. Your sense of hearing, sight, taste, smell, all your senses get dialed up so you can deal with the threat, right? So you know what's going on. As we mentioned in the last session, or someone brought up in the questions, your pain also gets dialed up in this state. So anything like that, oh, back pain is suddenly going to be in the red zone when you're in that state. So you can imagine a bit like that puppy. If someone comes up to you and touches you in that state, you're going to overreact, right? You're going to jump. So if you're somebody who gets into that state, say before you go on stage, you need isolation. You need to go and find a quiet place where you can just do some breathing and some other things that we'll talk about in a second to reset your system, to bring you back into that green zone, okay? If, however, you're in that dorsal vagal, the freeze response, and you're somebody who just goes, I don't know my own name right now, and I'm about to go on stage, right? You're in that numb, I don't know, I'm just not here. If you're in that state, you actually need social connection to pull you out of it. You need someone to make eye contact with you. That vagus nerve also mediates the responses to all our facial muscles. So when we were talking in the last session about communication, body language, the facial muscles of that, which are we're constantly reading everyone else's faces to see whether we're safe or not with them, right? Can I be socially engaged with you, or do I need to take a step back? That's done by reading the facial muscles, using the mirror neuron system, connecting it to emotions, and the vagus nerve is mediating that. So when we're in stress mode, we're less able to read facial expressions well, which is why what's going on right now in the world is crazy, because everyone's in fear mode. They're already less able to read facial expressions. Then you stick a mask on everyone. It's no wonder the fear's gone, galactic. So if you are in that freeze response, you need someone to connect with you. And with you guys, when you're working as groups, as performers, this is wonderful, because you can actually entrain your fellow chorus members to help you respond to this. You can all help each other with this. So if you know you're the person who gets like this, you can train all your fellow chorus members and say, look, if you see me like that, can you just leave me alone? Don't come up and go, oh yay, we're going on stage, because I'm gonna freak out, right? Can you just give me a moment? Just spot me, give me, or just push me into a corner and say, go and sit over there on your own. However, if you see somebody who's in that checkout state, or that's where you go to, then train people, say, just come up and say, hey, you're okay, we're with you, we're here, we got you, we got your back, make eye contact, smile, so that you can mirror yourself out of it. They're actually going to bring you into sympathetic so you can get back to that home base, right? So very important to be able to differentiate these so that you don't use the wrong thing for the wrong person. Because if you are in freeze mode and you isolate yourself, you're going to go down the rabbit hole, right? You need the opposite. So when we come into voicing, what we also see is that sound frequencies affect this whole system. So that vagus nerve is also mediating how we respond to sound frequency. So we get safety signals from sound as well. So your sympathetic system is going to respond to high frequency sounds. If someone screams, right, in alarm, you're going to freak out. Even if you can't see the person, you don't know what's going on, you're going to go into sympathetic mode because it's a safety signal. We are a tribe. And Kathy was mentioning, as we were chatting before the break, that our nervous systems are interdependent. We are responding to each other all the time through that mirror neuron system. It's what keeps us safe. If we're in a tribal unit, if we were sitting in a little circle all together right now at this moment, and I'm sitting opposite you, and some weird creature appears behind you, and I go like that, you haven't seen it, but you're automatically going to go, what? Even though you don't know what's there, because it keeps you safe. We are responsible for each other, right? And this is again why what's going on right now is crazy. We are all responsible for what we put into the field because everybody's responding to it. So if you're living in a state of fear when there isn't a threat, then you're dialing everyone else up as well, which is why we get all these kind of, aggressive things happening. So if you hear a shriek, your mirror neuron, remember, system is going to hear it, go, ah, when I make that noise, I'm freaked out. Therefore, your sympathetic system comes online. In the converse version of that, low frequency sounds trigger the freeze response. So aquatic reptilian predators emit low frequency sounds. And so that's why I put the Jaws theme there, because that's why it works so well. Right, that low frequency sound, you don't hear that and go, ah! Right? You hear that and go, oh! Right? It drops you into freeze state. And guess what? The movie was about a fish, right? So those extreme ends of the range drive those states. So if you have like a teenage son or something, or if you know a teenager who gets very kind of depressed and down, and then listens to kind of heavy metal music all the time, they're just driving themselves further down. What brings us out of it and brings us into our social engagement system is mid-range, melodic or prosodic sound. So prosody or prosodic sound is lilting sounds, which is why the mother's lullaby works so well. So a melodic prosodic sound calms the nervous system. You don't sing a lullaby up here, right? So baby would be freaking out. So what I say to people when I'm helping them manage with either anxiety or depression is set yourself a playlist of music that is mid-range frequencies, so not too high, not too low, melodic sounds. It's a bit of Mozart, right? Put that on your iPad, make yourself a little playlist so that you can either bring yourself down or up from wherever you are. So some artists will do that. They'll actually be listening to their own iPod or iPad before they go on stage, so that they're regulating their nervous system into that state. You can also sing yourself there, right? But sometimes if you're super depressed, you don't feel like singing. So you use an external influence to bring you up there. But humming, singing in that mid-range sound, a bit like how we said the body language is a self-fulfilling prophecy, so is the sound. So this is where sound and singing in particular can be medicine. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off with an exercise or a couple of exercises to help bring us back into our regulated state. And they're going to be breath exercises. Remember, your diaphragm is the main muscle of breathing. It's right in the middle of your body there. Nice 3D picture of it there. And breathing has multiple benefits. So a lot of people go, oh, do some breathing or just breathe out, to chill out, like it's some woo-woo thing, right? It actually has tangible physiological benefits. It changes our physiology when we change our breathing patterns that will regulate all the things that we've just looked at. It's going to reduce your heart rate and your blood pressure, increase your immunity. So when you're breathing deeply, you're bringing oxygenated air into all parts of your lungs. If you're in that shallow breathing mode, the air in the lower part of the lungs doesn't exchange. You're not drawing it down deeply enough. There's still air there, but it becomes stagnant. And would you rather drink from a stagnant pond or a babbling brook, right? Stagnant ponds are breeding grounds for bacteria. So people that get coughs that they can't shift, if they're living in a stressed state, they're never cleaning house and bringing that oxygenated air all the way down to the lungs. So when you do deep breathing, you're increasing your immunity. It reduces inflammation in the body, relaxes your muscles, improves the lymphatic system, which is the body's drainage system. So if you're somebody who gets swelling in your hands and feet and things like that, it's going to help with that. It improves your digestion. The diaphragm's a big pump for the digestive system. It stimulates that vagus nerve. It brings that online. So we get into that parasympathetic state. Protects against infection. So the way it brings your heart rate down is that when you're in stress mode and you're shallow breathing and you're not bringing enough oxygen in, there's not enough oxygen in the system to run all the muscles. So the heart has to pump more quickly to get what it has got round to where it needs to go. So when you've got more oxygen in the system, the heart doesn't have to pump so fast. So those are the sort of, hopefully I'm doing a good sales pitch on why breathing is more than just a sort of woo-woo thing. It changes your physiology. So I'm going to give you 2 exercises that use breath. They're different because they're for 2 different outcomes. So if you want to just get chilled out, just have a real relax after a performance, before you go to bed, if you have sleep problems, this is a good one to do before you go to bed. This is the one to do, but it's not good before you go on stage. We're going to do a different one for that. So if you're breathing to just get into a chill out state, we want to breathe in, allowing the abdomen to expand. So a lot of us, when we're in stress mode, we actually brace our stomach muscles inwards. And when you brace your stomach muscles inwards, you reduce the capacity of that diaphragm to move downwards. You can try it. If you suck your belly in and hold it and try and take a deep breath, you meet a brick wall. So we need to be able to breathe, allowing the abdomen to expand. And you want your exhale to be twice as long as the inhale. So if you breathe in for 2, you breathe out for 4, in for 3, out for 6. So the exhale puts us into parasympathetic mode. So you want to encourage the nervous system into that by making it twice as long. Make sure the shoulders and chest are relaxed so that you're not in that shallow breathing, because if you start breathing with your shoulders, your body's going to follow you into sympathetic mode. And this is best used before eating. So remember, I said you have to be in this state for your body to absorb food. So if you're someone who gets digestive issues with anxiety, doing this as you're preparing the food, do your breath work. Make it a ritual, so that when you sit before you eat, just take some deep breaths, draw yourself into this state. Then your system is open to receive the food. When you're in sympathetic mode, you ain't receiving anything. But this is not ideal, as I mentioned before, activity. We want to do something called a coherence technique, because we want to be coherent. We want to be on our game. So we don't want to be super chilled out beach mode to go on stage, but we don't want to be in full panic mode. So the word coherence comes from when we're talking about something called heart rate variability. This is the ability of our heart rate to kind of auto-correct. And when we're in a stress mode, a frustrated mode, for example, our heart rate variability gets very incoherent. We get this sort of scratchy readout on it if you've got a heart rate variability monitor on. What we want is this lovely, beautiful sine wave that goes on. Now, emotions have their own frequencies. We were talking there about sound frequencies. Emotions also carry frequencies, and they're measured in hertz, just like sound frequencies are. The frequency of appreciation and gratitude is so healing to the human body. It's our heart resonance. So we want to use that to help bring us into a coherent state. So this exercise, we want to focus the breathing on over the heart. So you want to imagine that you're drawing the air into your heart. And my kind of imagery for this is, as I say, imagine you've actually got nostrils over your heart, right? So rather than breathing in through your nose, you are breathing in through your nose, obviously, but you imagine it coming into your heart. As you bring the breath in, you want to bring in with it some sort of coherent emotion, gratitude, appreciation. So think of something you're grateful for in your life. Breathe that in with your in-breath, and on your exhale, you're going to breathe that emotion out to the world, right? So again, we are sharing the field. If you think of the field around you as being like water, you are putting that emotion into the water, and everyone else is sitting in that water too. The difference is for this one, where you want your inhale and exhale to be the same length, because we don't want to drop ourselves into full parasympathetic mode. So we typically say in for 5 and out for 5. And if you do 6 repetitions of that, it's 1 minute. So we call it the 1 minute coherence exercise. So if you think of breathing in for 5, going up the curve of that beautiful sine wave, and out for 5, going down it. So in for 5 and out for 5, breathing in gratitude and breathing it out to the world. That brings you into a coherent state. So you're on your game, you're not super stressed out, but you're not in sort of limp noodle mode either. So that's your good one for getting on stage. So set your playlist up for some mid-range music, train your team to bring you into a socially engaged state, do this breathing exercise. You can even do it as a group, which would be wonderful. So you practice that breathing as an ensemble before you go on stage, and then you're all auto-regulating each other. Okay, well, that's the end of that session. I'll just put that slide up if you want to take a screenshot. If you've got any questions that come to you after the events, I know your brains are overflowing right now. You could always email me after the event and say, that thing you said, can you just remind me what that was? And I'll be happy to answer. But as for now, I will stop sharing my screen and take any questions you might have.
Any questions? We did have a comment a little bit ago regarding mid-range frequency. There's loads of melodic heavy metal that's mid-range frequency, she says.
Yeah, I mean, it's things like you've got to look at, I mean, music's not just one thing, right? It's, you've got all that bandwidth within a song. So what's the bass, you know, what's dominating in that song? If there's a bass line kind of heavy frequency in there, that could, you know, it's like when you listen to it, you start getting a bit, right? It's going to alert certain parts of your nervous system. You can actually use music as kind of, I call it the frequency gym, right? We need resistance training as well. So can you hold your nervous system in regulation with that going on? That's a good exercise. So I'm not saying heavy metal music should never be listened to, but if you've got someone in a depressed state who can't get themselves out of it, it's not the thing that's going to break that cycle for them. So so listen to the whole bandwidth of songs, and often what we'll do is, depending on our mood, we'll tune into different aspects of it, because we always want something to reinforce, to validate who we are. I'm depressed and I want the world to know I'm depressed and I want to be validated for it. We don't want to be pulled out of it. So we'll actually, you know, attenuate ourselves to things that will reinforce that behavior. So we need to, this is why these things need to be preempted, and you need to set that playlist ahead of time, because in that state, you're not going to have the motivation to want to change it. So, so it's just using this to look at all the different ways. And from now on, when you're listening to music, analyze what it's doing to you. Where does it take you?
The no questions right at the second this moment, but I want to let everybody know that the link for the, oops, wait, we do have something. Link for the survey is in chat. And you can fill it out. Please fill one out for each class, and the classes are listed and you can choose your class. And then, okay, we do have another comment. In music therapy, we talk about the ISO principle. You may need to start with music that matches your state, then shift where you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are, that's great. Again, it kind of comes into that validation. Yeah, we got you. You know, all we're wanting is to someone to say, I heard you, right? I hear you. So that kind of matching the state first is that kind of, you've been heard. You've been heard. Now, do you want to follow me? So if somebody wants to engender your trust for you to follow them, you have to build the trust first. So that's kind of what that's doing. Yeah, build the trust first. You've been heard. Then now you're in trust, you can be followed. You can follow that person out of the rabbit hole. So yeah, absolutely. Great point.
Donna from Boston Skyline says, invaluable information every time I've heard you speak, and she wants to know if you want to move to the East Coast.
I used to live in New York, so a few years ago. So I was coming back every year, but since lockdown happened, I haven't been back. But typically, I'm normally in New York around June, July. I teach a course called One Voice, which is actually how you integrate dancing and singing simultaneously, and acting as well. I teach it with a wonderful voice teacher that gets into a lot more depth of all the anatomy of this kind of stuff. So if you're interested, let me know, and hopefully soon we'll be able to do that back in person in New York.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if that's only open to certain students, or is that open to the public?
Oh, everyone. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, we can make that information available to our members.
Yeah, we haven't got dates for this year yet. We've been doing it online the last couple of years. So once we've got the dates for it, I can send it out to you, and you can.
Yeah, absolutely. We can
Yeah,
put it
that
on
would be great. Put us
our
on your
calendar.
mailing list. Put us on your mailing list, Jenny.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, is everybody quiet now?
It seems like it.
I know it's kind of the end of the day for you guys, and I've thrown a lot of stuff that your brain just goes, oh, which is why I say feel free to email me after the event, because you'll be like, oh, I wish I'd asked that, and I wish I'd asked that. But I guess you've recorded these sessions, so you can watch back and just revisit it. It's things that you need to hear a few times. Just keep it a conceptual level now. You'll go away with a couple of things that you're like, oh, those things I really remember, and the rest I've totally forgotten. That's fine. Your body remembers to a certain extent. And then as you hear things again, you'll be like, oh, that's what she said in that thing. We like to hear things from multiple sources. So now you've just got a point of cross-reference for future.
Well, Jenny, you were as advertised. I'm so excited. I loved these classes. I loved the ones I saw you in person, and maybe we can get you in person one day.
One day, yeah.
That would be so great. But thank you so much for all of this. I think I speak for all of us when I say our eyes are opened. It's so cool to know what your body brings to the table, because we are our own instruments, and it's cool, very, very interesting and meaningful, really meaningful.
Yeah, and that's it. I think a lot of people shy away from you, like you were sort of saying. It's like, oh, I don't know about anatomy, biology, but when it's delivered in the right way, and when it's relevant, I won't teach anything that I cannot show direct relevance for your performance. Otherwise, it's just abstract information.
That's right.
And when you connect with, I can use this is helpful to me for my health, for the collective health, and for the audience's health, and to improve performance skills, then it becomes exciting, hopefully.
Well, I was thinking, we talk about our showmanship, well, now it's visual communication category, talks about physical expression, and that still feels painted on until you described the mirroring thing. And so now I feel like I have the root of physical expression. It's not just my body has to show something, it's here's how. I just thought that was terrific. That was really wonderful for all of us to hear.
Yeah, and it just gives you the breadcrumbs to follow, because we all have those days. I was in musical theatre, it's 8 shows a week, you're doing the same thing night after night after night. And sometimes you're just not there, you're just not in it. And so this can give you a more mechanical way to get there. Whereas other days you're already there and it's fine. So, I always say when I'm working with performers, I don't train you to be brilliant at what you do. Particularly I work with, mostly with professionals. They're already damn good at it, right? I give you the skills to get you to dig yourself out of adversity. That's what we really need to learn. We want to know what do we do when things go wrong? How do we get ourselves out of it? So if you do forget your lyric or you forget your choreography, if you're in that emotional thread, you'll be able to your body will come up with something that fits. Right. And smudge over until you drop back in again, rather than have that clunk moment where you just stood still on the stage going, so if you're able to get into that emotional flow, it will bridge and smudge over the gaps if there are any dropouts from the intellectual.
Right.
So,
there are a couple last minute thank yous. Just Marinka wants to say, as a neuroscientist who struggles with general anxiety, this was a very good talk. Thank you.
Wow.
And also Joanne, I've been doing training via work for managing my high stress job in engineering management. And this has explained so much about what I've seen before, but not understood. especially combined with the other class. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and this is so useful for, completely non-performance situations when you are in a business meeting or something like that, and they're all personalities around. You can become the puppet master of any personalities when you hack this stuff, when you know how to work this, because what you set up in your body dictates the energy around you. If someone is an aggressive person and you always go into that kind of fear postured prey mode when they're around, they're always going to go for you, right? Because everyone's trying to find power balance. If you become the prey, they'll become the predator. Typically, adversely, if you go in as the predator, right, well, I'm going to get them back, well, then you'll just be headbutting, right? That's incendiary. Whereas if you can find that neutral, coherent place, it diffuses people. It's incredible to watch. You see people who are normally really aggressive, kind of like, they can't really do it because they're just not allowing for it. So you literally become the puppet master of any interaction, and you can diffuse any situation. So that is empowering in itself, which, guess what, reduces your anxiety. When you know you can always control the situation, you don't have to be anxious. Right. So that's why it's, something you can practice it with your cat, your dog, they're responding on this level as well. Practice it with other people, and it soon becomes a skill you can really get, and you'll spot it in everyone else. And you say, I see what you're doing, you're there, I'm going to need to go here to just counteract and diffuse this and neutralize it. It's great fun as well to do. So.
We'll have to practice that, Karen, in management team meetings.
Yeah, we will. We'll practice that.
People watching. It's great.
All right. Well, thank you, Jenny.